This plant, it's been used for quite some time in the Mazateca region by the curanderos and the healers there, specifically for healing physical illnesses. So the way that they use the plant traditionally is by chewing the leaves. So there's multiple routes of administration with salvia. You can chew the fresh leaves, you can chew the dried leaves, you can make a tea out of it, but that's very, very weak. And or you can dry the leaves and smoke it, or you can make a concentrated extract out of it and smoke that.
Welcome to the Mindfulness Experience podcast. My name is Keith Fiveson. I'm your host. Today, I'm excited to introduce our guest, Mr. Christopher Solomon, to the show. Christopher is a somatic salvia guide and healer. He's a teacher and an inventor of a pipe that aids in the mindful exploration of Salvia Divinorum. Christopher has dedicated his life to working with salvia as a medicine and has over a decade of experience in this field. He has spent the last 5 years guiding individuals and groups through salvia sessions. Christopher has a unique approach to working with salvia, incorporating somatic therapy techniques, and his vast experience in working with the plant has really afforded a lot of people breakthroughs. In response to the 2020 pandemic, Christopher started guiding people on salvia sessions via Zoom. This has given him a broader reach and the ability to support people all over the world, right in the comfort of their own homes. So Christopher's main goal is to empower people to use salvia for themselves in a supportive, informative, and enlightening manner, and his deep understanding of salvia and its properties allows him to guide people safely through experiences leading to transformational healing. Christopher holds a BA in psychology from the University of Texas at Dallas and received his training in somatic psychotherapy from the Hakomi Institute of California in their comprehensive 2-year training certification program. He is also certified in holistic and integrative nutrition and has completed the body-mind centering training at the School for Body-Mind Centering with Bonnie Bainbridge Cohen. So let's dive into this interview with Christopher. I'm really excited to learn about his work with salvia and find out how it can be used to enhance our mindfulness practices. All right. Christopher, hey. Welcome to the Mindfulness Experience. How are you?
It's so good to be here. I'm doing fantastically well, and I think you really summed everything up perfectly right there. And there's still lots more to be said. So we can dive.
Man, I hope so. We've got some time to do that and really unpack it. And I was so thrilled to meet you. We were in a group, a peer support group, really looking at this whole new landscape of psychedelics and medicines and plant medicines, specifically entheogens, that really help individuals to break through and to really have transformative experiences. So you've got quite a bit of a background, and I was really impressed and very, very thankful that we have this chance to talk today. Can you tell us a little bit about your background and how you got involved with working with salvia?
Yeah. My process with working with salvia really happened very organically and quite slowly over time. I had some initial salvia experiences when I was in high school that really made it seem as if there wasn't too much that this plant actually had to offer. A very common experience that people have when they first smoke salvia is by smoking concentrated extracts. And initially, people's experiences are meaningless, kind of bizarre. They can be quite terrifying because it's easy to smoke too much. So one of the very important factors that I like to talk about and teach people about with salvia is about proper dosing and how to approach the plant mindfully. But unfortunately, most people don't approach the plant mindfully, especially when they found out about it initially, because it was sold in smoke shops and head shops as a legal alternative to weed, and the smoke shops didn't give any guidance about how much should be smoked. And so because of that, people would smoke a large bowl of salvia,
Mm.
have a dissociative, terrifying experience because it's very potent.
Mm.
And I was one of those people that the first time I smoked salvia, it just seemed odd. I felt weird tactile forces pulling and pushing on my body. And there was odd cartoon-like visuals that came to my mind's eye.
Mhm.
And it only lasted for a few minutes. And then
Mhm.
I kind of came back to reality, and it was bizarre, but there was nothing in it that felt compelling to go back and do it again.
Mm. Mhm. Mhm.
And then, like a year went by, I tried salvia again, and again, not much happened. I either just laughed hysterically for a few minutes for no reason,
Mm.
and one's voice can sometimes get really, really low. So you
Mhm.
talk very low down like
Mm.
this
Mm.
sometimes.
Mhm.
Your motor coordination is impacted.
Mhm.
And again, one of the most striking things about it is the very felt sense of tactile forces in and outside of your body, pulling, manipulating you, flattening you, spreading you out.
Wow. Mhm.
So it can feel like you're becoming a two-dimensional object, or it's
Mhm.
common to become inanimate.
Mm. Mhm.
Then you feel all inanimate matter around you becoming animate.
Mm.
And but still, it was not much to write home about.
Mm.
And my experience with salvia really started to change when I meditated first before smoking it. Just
Mm.
for a few minutes, I took 10 slow, deep breaths and then smoked salvia. And that was a completely different experience and
Wow.
really keyed me into the fact that there is actually a intelligent entity being behind this plant that I met firsthand when I smoked it after meditating.
Mm.
And, so that was the first thing that keyed me into the fact that there's more to this plant, and more specifically, how you approach the plant makes a very big difference.
Well, I think that's incredible. So, the whole smoke shop experience, and you talking about cannabis and weed, as you put it, I think there's a lot of people who sort of dive into something and they think, if a little is good, then a lot must be really good. Let me
Mhm.
go ahead and try more. And
Right.
in a lot of cases, it's really the opposite, impact, because the microdose effect, we know a lot of research in terms of just having enough to shut down the default mode network and having enough that really helps you to see things that you may need to see. And you've obviously experienced that through the process of having the right intention, the right the right setting, and then the right integration. So for people who may not be familiar with salvia, can you explain what Salvia Divinorum is and its properties? Since this is the area, I mean, a lot of people know about cannabis now. It's legal in a lot of places, but not many people will know about salvia. Tell us a
Right.
little bit about it.
Right, right. Salvia, it's a fascinating plant because it's endemic to the Sierra Mazateca region outside of Oaxaca in Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
And endemic meaning that it's the only place that it was naturally occurring in the world. And Salvia divinorum hasn't been found anywhere else in the world to be growing naturally.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's almost 1,000 different types of salvia.
Hmm.
The sage that we cook with is Salvia officinalis. Rosemary actually has just recently been reclassified as a salvia.
Hmm.
I believe it's Salvia rosmarinus. And there's a red type of salvia that they use for inflammation. And there's actually some beautiful books about all the different types of salvias that there are.
Mm-hmm.
And so of all the
So
salvia,
salvia itself, I mean, is just the name of a type of a plant. And then there
exactly.
are different varieties, like we would say, human beings, but then, humans come from different areas around the world and speak different languages. So
Mhm.
the corollary would be, pretty much the same here, right? Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Salvia is the genus and Divinorum is the species.
Got it. Okay, good.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
And so this plant, it's been used for quite some time in the Mazateca region
Mhm.
by the curanderos and the healers there, specifically for healing physical illnesses.
Mhm.
And the way that they do it is it's just a regular leafy green plant. When you look at the plant, it doesn't look as if there's anything particularly remarkable about it. It has nice, big, large emerald green leaves that have nice, big veins on them. It has a square stem, which is a characteristic of many salvias. And so the way that they use the plant traditionally is by chewing the leaves, something called a quid. So there's multiple routes of administration with salvia. You can chew the fresh leaves, you can chew the dried leaves, you can make a tea out of it, but that's very, very weak. And or you can dry the leaves and smoke it, or you can make a concentrated extract out of it and smoke that.
Now, is it legal in most of the states, or what's the legality of it right now?
It is illegal in some states and legal in some states. It's federally legal, but it's on a
federally it's legal. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got it.
And there was a push to make it illegal in around about 2008. A bunch of states jumped on the bandwagon and they quickly passed a bill that made it illegal. But that's when it was getting a lot of media attention because people were posting videos of themselves having dysphoric, scary salvia experiences on YouTube. And then people were watching that and thinking, holy shit, this is a dangerous drug. We need to stop it now. And it was really, the big push came when someone committed suicide and his parents blamed Salvia Divinorum on it, even though he had since stopped smoking salvia for quite some time. And there's been no other cases of people having suicidal ideation because of salvia. And actually, the opposite has been true. There's been quite a few people I've spoken to who were close to committing suicide, and then they smoked salvia, and it just took away all their suicidal ideation immediately.
Like esketamine or something along that line. Yeah.
Right.
So what is it? So what is the plant generally used for? Because we know, like in the case of, cannabis, a lot of people will talk about, its use in terms of working with PTSD, certainly from a microdose viewpoint or from a creative viewpoint. If we look at, psilocybin or LSD, we see different areas, again, through PTSD or trauma, to be able to go ahead and rewrite or reframe, reboot, reset, someone's experience. Tell me a little bit about it, because you incorporate somatic therapy techniques into your salvia sessions. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. So it actually has quite a wide variety of uses. Again, the traditional use for healing physical illnesses, it's very useful for inflammation, especially in the gut. It's very useful for rheumatism as well, and treating alcoholism, opioid withdrawals, and general addiction. And this is because it affects some opioid receptors in the brain. That's another thing that makes salvia unique, is even though it is a hallucinogenic plant, it doesn't contain any alkaloids, and it doesn't affect the 5-HT2A receptors. Instead, it affects the kappa opioid receptor system in our brain. And so there's this compound. It's a beast of a compound called salvinorin A. If you look at the molecular structure, it doesn't look like anything related to an alkaloid. And so this salvinorin A is an agonist against our kappa opioid receptor system. So we have three opioid receptor systems in our brain. We've got kappa, delta, and mu. So when you take painkillers like oxycodone or anything like that, or you take heroin, it affects the mu opioid receptor system. And what that does is, as we all know, it makes one feel short-term feelings of euphoria and relaxation and not really being too worried about things. But then after that wears off, one builds a tolerance, one gets cravings, and it makes, you want to go back and do these substances more often. Salvia Divinorum actually has the opposite effect. When we activate the kappa opioid receptor system, it can induce feelings of dysphoria. So it's not exactly a necessarily pleasurable experience right off the bat. Because of this, there are not many people who get physiologically or even psychologically addicted to salvia. So dysphoria meaning that you explain the term dysphoria for our listeners. Yeah, dysphoria meaning that the experience can feel physiologically uncomfortable. One can feel uncomfortable, prickly sensations on the body.
Mm-hmm.
One can feel as if one is a little bit outside of your body, so it feels like one can have a dissociative out-of-body experience.
Sort of like ketamine in that
Mhm.
respect. There's although ketamine is certainly has an addictive quality to it if used certainly more often, but you don't see this here with salvia, is what you're saying. Yeah.
Right. Salvia is very self-regulating, and unlike substances that affect the mu opioid receptors, with salvia, there's something called reverse tolerance. So you actually need less of it over time.
Interesting.
And so, so people say, how much do I smoke? And it's like, well, how long have you been smoking it? What have your previous experiences been like?
Mm-hmm.
The dosage with salvia makes such a big difference as well, because at a low dose, it's actually a very embodying experience. But at a high dose, it's very dissociative and unembodying. So one actually has quite a large degree of control over how far you can go into salvia space and what you get out of it. So, the question of what it's useful for, healing physical ailments. I've had some very profound firsthand physiological healing experiences with salvia. Where it got rid of a swollen lymph node in my neck that I've been trying to battle for months. I got rid of it in the course of about 5 to 10 minutes. It's very good if you have food poisoning or diarrhea. It stops that. It's very useful for menstrual cramps, if you have any sort of cramps like that. When you get the kappa opioid receptor system activated, it is also an analgesic, so it's a painkiller. And but then from the psychological side of things, there's the salvia can be quite an emotionally neutralizing experience. And so, you smoke.
Neutralizing, like numbing, is that what you mean by that, from the viewpoint of just sort of again back to the dissociative side of things, being able to sort of step outside, look at yourself in the mirror, kind of in that respect? Yeah.
It's less of a numbing and more of a felt sense of objective distance from the emotions that you're experiencing.
Got it.
So one's still aware of the emotions, and one can feel very physically where they are in one's body, but you have a sense of removal from them, but you're still personally attached to them in a way where you recognize they're a part of your being, but they are not actually your being. So salvia does a very good job of bringing one to what some might refer to their objective, authentic self. So it does a very good job of helping you actually pass out what is yours, what is not yours.
Wow. So you're able to really kind of do a 360 circumspect in terms of who you are, where you are, what's going on inside your body, what's going on inside your whole physiology, biology, maybe even from a relational viewpoint, to kind of just, the old song, I just checked in to see what condition my condition is in. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So tell me, how do you, can you kind of walk us through, what someone might expect, during a session, a guided session, because we talked about the somatic element. I'm just wondering how that kind of ties into it. And one of the things you started talking about was, the ability to have some meditation, some intention before you go into it. And I'm just wondering what a step by step, maybe, whatever that might look like for you in terms of how many steps, or what it might look like in terms of setting and integration.
Yeah, good question. So I guess first one, we'll need to talk a little bit about proper dosing with salvia.
Okay.
And which route of administration you're going to go. So when I do guided sessions with people, what I do is I provide very small doses of either 5 or 10x extract. I'll quickly explain what a salvia extract is. So you grow a salvia plant and you pick the leaves and you dry the leaves, and that would be considered like plain leaf 1x. It's just the plain leaf. Now 5x means that you were to take 5 grams of leaf, extract the salvinorin A out of that, and then infuse that back on 1 gram of leaf. So you're making a 5 times potency extract.
Hmm.
And same as 10x, you got 10 grams of leaf infused back into 1 gram of leaf, and so on and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
And so when people smoke salvia, they generally have a scary experience because they load a whole bowl of extract,
Hmm.
which is the equivalent of saying, like, chugging a bottle of tequila and having that be your impression of what alcohol is versus slowly sipping a margarita.
Mm-hmm.
So when I do guided sessions
Wow.
with people, I use, for those who like specific numbers, around 7 to 10 milligrams
Hmm.
of 10x extract.
Hmm. Okay.
So
Does it matter, like, with ketamine, there are different doses for different people. Body weight is size, body weight, like I'm 6'2", 200 pounds, do you go by some of those measures, or, if there are some other contraindications, if I was on, Xanax, some SSRIs, some other things, would you look at that? I'm just wondering from the viewpoint of the neuroreceptors and
yeah,
what the contraindications are if I'm smoking cannabis or something
right,
else like that,
right. Yeah. So I've noticed no difference in
Hmm.
people's gender or weight being much of a factor as far as how much they need.
Hmm.
Um, because salvia is not an alkaloid, it doesn't affect the 5-HT2A receptors. It means that you can take salvia if you are on SSRIs.
Hmm. Like ketamine.
Um, like,
Hmm.
yeah. Um, if you have, if you're on opioids,
Hmm.
it can dampen the effects of salvia.
Hmm.
Same thing is true with naltrexone. Some people take naltrexone for chronic pain and other disorders.
Hmm.
And naltrexone can, again, dampen the effects of salvia.
And I imagine the same thing with cannabis, that could also dampen the effects of salvia.
Cannabis and salvia actually work quite well together. I've
Oh,
actually
really?
noticed salvia works very well with,
Hmm.
I've had salvia with cannabis, I've had salvia with ketamine, I've had
Hmm.
salvia with DMT, and
Hmm.
I've had salvia on the morning of an ayahuasca experience. But I was speaking to someone else recently, and he says that he chews salvia leaves when he has an ayahuasca experience, and it takes the nausea away from the ayahuasca experience.
Really? Hmm.
I've noticed the same thing when I combine salvia with DMT. It
Hmm.
takes a lot of the body load away with the DMT experience,
Hmm.
and it takes the nausea. And also, salvia is very potent anti-anxiety inducing at the low doses, so it can take the anxiety away from these experiences. So I've actually found that salvia has a wonderful synergy with most things.
Hmm.
Um, I've taken salvia with a little bit of ibogaine before when I was microdosing ibogaine, and I
Hmm.
noticed the ibogaine potentiated the salvia a lot
Hmm.
more. So it actually
Hmm.
increased the strength of the experience
Hmm.
based on it, both intensity wise and based on the length of the experience as
Hmm.
well. It made it twice as
So,
much.
so I come to you and I say to you, listen, Christopher, here I am, 6'2", eyes of blue, 200 pounds. What can you do?
Mhm.
And I say to you also, hey, I've got some hypertension.
Mm.
Walk me through a typical kind of an experience.
Yeah. So, as you mentioned in the intro, I work with people remotely via Zoom.
Hmm.
Where it is legal. And what I do is, I send all the supplies that one needs. So one thing is I make a 5 bowl water pipe that lets
Hmm.
you preload all your salvia bowls beforehand.
Hmm.
One of the biggest changes that I've made in working with salvia, and what I would say my protocol is rather than smoking one large bowl, I have the clients smoke 5 bowls, five small bowls over the course of about an hour, with at least 5 minutes between each bowl.
Hmm. Okay. So I've got my bowls, I've received them, and we've got 5 small bowls, and over the course of an hour, we're going to go ahead and you're going to say, Keith, let's get to it. And
Right.
okay, I'm ready.
And all right. And setting expectations is important as well, because I think it's very important to know what to look for,
Hmm.
what to not look for, and what to look for.
Hmm.
For example, with salvia, you're not going to have DMT-like visuals. and you're not going to have a slew of creative thinking patterns coming on, similar like one would with cannabis.
Mm-hmm.
So at low doses, salvia is much more of a quiet meditative experience where the mind actually becomes quite still and the internal chatter seems to stop. And salvia is much more of a somatic medicine, meaning it is much more of a physically felt kinesthetic experience than it is an emotional, thought-provoking experience.
Hmm.
So
So is
rather
it
than
like do we talk about a vibe? So is there a sense of really having an embodied experience, to your point, where you're feeling like you're totally in your body, you're feeling like you're totally present to what's going on in the moment, and your chatter and all the thought patterns. I mean, that to me would be sort of like a Satori kind of moment where you're having the sense of, the ineffable. Yeah.
Right. Yes, salvia and meditation go hand in hand. If you were to try to sum up what a light dose salvia experience is like, you could say feels as if you are on day 8 of your Vipassana retreat.
Mm-hmm.
It very, very quickly takes one to a very deep, still place of meditation where you feel very embodied.
Mm-hmm.
Now, at the same time, though, if you then, as we proceed to progress through the multiple bowls,
Mm-hmm.
where one initially might have felt energy and movement happening within one's body, one can then feel these same sorts of energies happening outside of your body as well.
Mm.
So
What do you mean? Like the room is vibing, like the walls are moving, like the carpets,
like
wiggling, or
it's
what's
more like one gets a felt sense as if there is a hmm, people will say that they feel a feeling of rotation happening outside of their body.
mm,
So
mm-hmm,
they might feel nothing in their body, but they feel movement and they feel warmth and they feel tactile energy.
mm.
And they can also feel the sense of a presence of other in the room with them.
What's happening to the respiration? What's happening to the heartbeat? What's happening to, the neurokinetic energy that's, dancing all around, which is kind of what I'm hearing in some of what you're talking about.
Yeah. So I notice an immediate relaxation coming through the body. The
Mm,
breathing is going a lot slower.
mm, mhm,
It feels as if it's easier to breathe as well. I was working with someone recently and he had trouble taking full breaths, generally speaking.
mhm,
And so the Salvia experience can be a very informative body worker and a very informative guide.
mm, mhm,
So in his particular case, what he felt was um, a deep opening up right below his belly, close to his root. And he just felt his breath drop down there. And the message Salvia gave him was, hey, you don't have to work so hard to expand your lungs in order to get a deep breath. Just let your breath drop down to your root.
mm, mhm.
And so,
So it's that real sort of sense of calm, the real sense of kind of riding the breath and really recognizing that while the breath is still there, it's not necessary to go ahead and pump it or, really kind of get all worried about it. It's just a really kind of quiet little purr. Yeah.
it's a quiet purr and it's helping you get out of your own way. So your body's automatic functions can just do things as they need to do.
Mm-hmm.
It's quite common for people to feel as if their consciousness and their psyche is actually leaving their body.
Mm-hmm.
And while they're out of their body, there is this sense of entities coming into one's body
Mm-hmm.
and kind of cleaning one up and reorganizing things, both psychologically and energetically. So for this reason, salvia can actually be a very useful aid at helping one integrate other plant medicines.
Mm-hmm. Wow. So, one of the things that was interesting to me, I mean, you've mentioned it a couple of times, we've talked about it, is the, day, 7 of the Vipassana retreat, the insight meditation retreat, or, whatever day that was. But, the whole idea of meditation, the whole idea of presencing what's presence, what is present and what's going on, and the ability to reboot, reset, reframe, experiences. I'm wondering, that's very different from, what you sort of talked about in terms of the misconceptions around salvia. And I'm wondering, what are, some of these misconceptions? And before we go there, how do you best prepare for this kind of an experience? When you're working with someone, if you said to me, "Hey, Keith, here's your package. You got it, great. Now, did you do your homework?" So what kind of homework, what's the homework? What would I do, and how would we kind of kick that off?
Yeah. So, one of the things that's quite wonderful about Salvia is that as far as your, set and setting is concerned,
Mm-hmm.
um, there are certain days where I know it would be a terrible idea for me to take LSD or mushrooms because I might be in a foul mood and things just feel like they're all over the place. And I was like, well, this would just be asking for trouble if I were to take any sort of substance.
Yeah, because it amplifies everything. Yeah.
Exactly. Now, Salvia does a really good job of meeting one where one is. And this is actually a theme that many people notice as they continue to use Salvia over time, that the message that Salvia gives you is like, hey, this is all about meeting yourself where you are and being in a healthy relationship with yourself and being present and engaged with yourself, with the people around you, and really being engaged in the moment and not being so concerned about what's happening before and what's happening after.
So are you saying that the preparation work isn't as important? I'm a little confused.
Yeah, it's not. The preparation work doesn't need to be as involved.
I see. Okay. So it doesn't necessarily amplify maybe what I'm feeling before I start the process of jumping into it in terms of my, what's going on inside of me and amplifying whatever my consciousness is or my subconsciousness is.
Right.
What you're saying is it sort of, as a whole body experience, it kind of meets you in your body and it kind of helps you from an inquiry viewpoint, kind of say, hey, let's check in to see what condition your condition is in, or
Exactly. It's more like, I like to think of salvia as a really great neutralizer. If you're feeling down, it'll bring you up to a steady baseline. And if you're feeling up and manic, it'll bring you down to a steady baseline. So it's very, very good at bringing the system to a state of homeostasis. And because of this, it makes it very helpful for emotional regulation. There's someone that I know that he'll sometimes have anxiety attacks, panic attacks, and he'll smoke salvia in the middle of a panic attack. And it'll just bring him straight back down to feeling as if the panic attack was never even there. And so, when people like to say, like, well, what do I do to get prepared before a session? I'd like to say, just have a clean room, have a clean, nice, tidy space, and really prepare your space as if you were to prepare it if you were going to do an extended meditation. So it's important to have a quiet environment because one's sensitivity to sound can become quite amplified on salvia. One can start to hear things happening very far away, and they seem quite pointed and focused towards one. So generally people prefer to do salvia in silence and in a dim environment with as little distractions as possible. It's a much more of a inward experience than it is an outward facing experience. Music can generally be quite distracting. And as far as what one can do to prepare, it's always very useful to get clear on one's intentions, to maybe do some journaling beforehand. But I think the most helpful experience that people have noticed is to focus on body-based meditations beforehand.
So like doing a body scan, being able to go ahead and really focus in on your senses, your eyes, your ears, your nose, your mouth, your tongue, the ability to move into your upper torso, the lower torso, have an awareness of sensation, all of those things. But unlike a lot of the other, entheogens, or things like MDMA or ketamine for that matter, they use the blindfold. Yep, you get that blindfold, you get that aspect. But there is music, because the music is often used as a sort of a way to bring up archetypally, what is going on or what has gone on in terms of the takeoff, the flight, the landing, and then the ability to go ahead and really see how that correlates with your own life experience. Yeah. This is different. This is different.
Very different. Yeah, with Salvia, the stiller you are and the more quiet you are, the more you're going to notice.
So it's very Zen. It sounds very, very Zen.
Very, very. It makes sitting still and being quiet feel very pleasurable.
Wow. Wow.
And now, you mentioned these archetypal experiences. One thing that's interesting with Salvia as well is it seems as if there are initially a set of archetypal experiences that people have when they first start exploring Salvia. It's very common to feel as if you are a wheel. So you feel like you're
a wheel. You're a wheel.
You feel as if you're a huge wheel just rotating infinitely through time and space.
Sounds like the Bhava Chakra wheel of life, really understanding that, we are our total experiences, set sum of experiences, and that, as we have learned, and as we root ourselves into certain behaviors, so we become, right?
Exactly. So there's this sense of another one of the archetypes is people feel as if they are in the 1950s.
In the 1950s, with like black and white TV, that kind of thing, or what do you mean, like with fedoras and like long dresses?
More like more like the plasticky side of the 1950s,
row houses and camel cigarettes.
Right. And it's so common with so many people that I've worked with. They've never read anything about Salvia before. Maybe their third bowl into it. They'll just say something like, I don't know why, but it just feels so 1950s.
Maybe that's the two-dimensional quality of, as you mentioned, you sort of move into a sort of a tinny kind of quality that's less technicolor and more black and white.
It could be. I mean, and it's not always the 1950s. I was working with someone recently, and he said that he was in the 1920s floating above a train station.
Wow. 1950s.
And so there's definitely
20s. Those are good years, man. Certainly in the U.S. Boom era. I mean, the 20s and the 50s that's where it was all happening, right?
Right. Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah. So I've been kind of thinking, like, why is this? And I've noticed that it happens with people no matter what their ages. They can be in their early 20s or they can be in their 70s. And there can be the sense of going back in time. So time travel is definitely a thing that feels very possible with Salvia. Wow. And not just time travel. One can feel as if one is living in someone else's consciousness. You get plopped back in time. So there's this idea of the multiverse becomes very real with Salvia, where you feel yourself living in multiple timelines.
Well, it's very interesting to me because I'm a big fan of Stanislav Grof's work in terms of understanding the power of breath and the power of the of non-ordinary states of consciousness, and really understanding that they are as real as ordinary states of consciousness, which can be really in some cases extraordinary or extraordinary, for that matter. So I think what you're talking about here is the ability to go ahead and really do some inner work, and the ability to really kind of take a look at maybe ancestral work, maybe archetypal work, maybe work that really helps the individual to, really from a somatic viewpoint, deal with some traumas that they may not have dealt with before. I really like the idea of the Zen quality of the quietness and the sensitivity of it and the amplified hearing aspects of it. What are let me ask you, what are some of the common, I was talking about this before, we didn't get there. What are some of the common misconceptions about salvia, and how do you address some of those with clients? I mean, because, I'm just wondering, like, we talked about the weed shops or the smoke shops, Creighton is another one that's out there. And, there's some really bad press around that, in terms of the impact of it. And some people might think that salvia is a little like Creighton because you had mentioned that. Can you talk to something, about, that when I say you mentioned it, that you can get it at these shops, these smoke shops. Can you talk a little bit about what the common misconceptions are?
Yeah, one of the common myths that's floating around is that in order for salvia to work, you have to smoke a lot of it very quickly,
Hmm.
and that you need to use one of those little blowtorch lighters.
Hmm.
And so there's this myth that the experience needs to be rushed, and you have to do it all at once. And if you don't do it all at once, it's not going to work, and you're going to miss out on this window of opportunity.
Hmm.
And so, psychologically, that sets people up for thinking like, I got to hurry up into this experience. But what they're unknowingly doing is rushing into a very deep, uncomfortable experience that can be quite traumatizing. There's quite a few people that I work with who come to me specifically because they want to rewrite their initial terrifying salvia experience. They'll be like, oh man, 20 years ago I smoked salvia and it still sits with me today how terrifying that was. But also at the same time, I was clued into the fact that there's something more that this plant actually has to offer me. So that's the biggest misconception, is that the experience has to be rushed and you have to do a lot of it at once.
And one of the other things you talked about, which I think is very interesting, Creighton has a really bad reputation in terms of addiction qualities. So, highly addictive. I'm trained as a credentialed alcohol and substance abuse counselor, a certified addiction recovery coach. So, this whole issue of looking at drugs and, better living through chemistry, if you will, the ability for us to really look at neurogenesis, look at, being able to build the connections, the neuroreceptors throughout our brain, and being able to rewire our consciousness or expand it, I think is great. But on the other side, you've got drugs that really don't do good stuff for our bodies. What I'm hearing from you here is that this is a really a natural plant. You've perfected a methodology to go ahead and smoke it. You have a really titrated kind of approach, a very measured approach to actually experimenting with it. And then you help guide people through that process. So from a physical and a psychological viewpoint, what have people experienced coming out the other side of it? Because you talked about one client. I'm just wondering, you've worked with a few clients, so they go ahead and they get it, they look at it, they have these misconceptions, and now you're helping them to reframe. But what are some of the breakthroughs, if you will? Are there breakthroughs? And maybe on the other side of that, just to get real, have there been some I don't know, some freakouts, some bad trips, if you will.
Right. So, as far as what people get out of it, a lot of it depends on why they are using salvia in the first place. You mentioned addiction, you mentioned kratom. I've worked with quite a few people who have been addicted to kratom, and I've worked with other people who are addicted to opioids. And they are in a state of having withdrawals. So, for example, this one person I was working with, if he doesn't have his kratom multiple times a day, he would kind of start to get tetany, cramping in his hands. He would start to sweat profusely. He would, start to shake and get shaky and nauseous. Same thing with someone I was working with who was addicted to opioids. I think it was also Suboxone. And so I've noticed with that, when they smoke salvia, the withdrawal symptoms immediately stop.
So it sounds a little bit like Ibogaine in that particular respect. I mean, there's this whole study in Kentucky where they're doing a study around, using Ibogaine for, opioid addiction. So it's nice to hear this. Yeah.
Yes, yeah. So it's very good for opioid and cocaine addiction as well.
Hmm.
Um, so there's the physiological side where it actually stops the withdrawal, so the person
Hmm.
doesn't feel like they have to go back and have that substance again.
Hmm.
And that withdrawal cessation seems to continue for the remainder of the day, for a couple of days even.
Hmm.
Um, Also, there is, another part that comes with salvia is the ability, when one's sitting with it mindfully, to do parts work with oneself.
Hmm. Hmm.
So one can actually get into emotional discussions, felt emotional discussions with different parts of our being. So you can
Hmm.
get into a conversation with the addict, you can
Hmm.
get into a conversation with the judge or the critic, or however these parts are showing up.
Hmm.
And Salvia can help you show you where these parts are actually localized in your body.
Hmm. So the IFS work, the internal family systems work, Dick Schwartz has done, that whole idea of really understanding that there are multiple parts of ourselves, and some of them are exiled, and some of them are, protectors, and so on and so forth. So you're saying that this really helps you to see what you need to see and maybe bring the whole family together. Yeah.
Exactly. And rather than because again, there is this emotional neutrality that can come with salvia.
Mm-hmm.
It helps one view with equanimity all these different parts of oneself.
Mm-hmm.
And so then one can view the part of yourself that is, say, your internal critic, and
Mm-hmm.
you can view it from a place of neutrality where that gets you more towards the step of befriending these different parts
Mm-hmm.
rather than trying to exile them, rather than saying to the internal judge or the critic inside of you, hey, get the hell out of here, you're messing my life, I don't like you anymore.
Mm-hmm.
It's only going to make that part dig its heels in even more.
Mm-hmm.
And believe it or not, these parts are trying to help us. So they're actually trying to communicate something with us.
Mm-hmm.
And so it lets one come more into a healthy relationship with all parts of oneself,
Mm-hmm.
and really just recognize them as merely parts that are trying to communicate with you. And if one just listens, then one can actually hear the message that might need to be heard.
So this is good stuff, and I just want to ask you finally, when you start taking a look at salvia, not a lot of people are really aware of salvia and its benefits as you've outlined, and I think probably to your point, there hasn't been a really good route of administration.
Mm.
And you've created this pipe, and you've looked at a way to certainly an approach that allows people from a route of administration to have the setting, really understand what's going to potentially happen, and then
Mm.
from an integration viewpoint, really help them to integrate some of the stuff that comes up for them. As
Mm.
you say, these parts from a IFS viewpoint are more accessible when you're under the influence, the use of salvia.
Mm.
And that's for people who may be, really tied up with some trauma or tied up with some issues that they might have dealt with. What do
Mm.
you what do you see as the future of salvia and your work in this field? What do you think it looks like? What does it look like to you?
Yeah, yeah. Um, I'm seeing a few ways that this can go. The one thing I think that's important for people to know is the more one uses. So I mentioned these initial archetypal experiences that people have.
Mm-hmm.
They get they felt like they get taken to a place that they call Salvia Land, which feels like a village with inhabitants,
Mm-hmm.
and it feels like it's a very ancient village and there are certain archetypes that people experience within that village. Um, Meeting laborers, the experience of sitting in a schoolhouse,
Mm-hmm.
um, carnivals and festivals, circuses. Um, so there's the Salvia land that people go to. So there's, a set of archetypal experiences that people have. But then what one notices that over time, as you continue to use Salvia, that those archetypal experiences start to fade and they no longer show up. And
Mm-hmm.
then it becomes much more of a personally intimate, private experience.
Mm-hmm.
So more so than other plant medicines, I've noticed salvia is a practice, and one does kind of have to come back to it repeatedly,
Mm-hmm.
um, and learn one's own way of navigation. So a lot of what I like to do is I like to on-ramp people and teach you. Let's figure out how you figure out your dosage for yourself. Because there is some people are a little bit more sensitive than others. Some people need a little bit more, some people need a little bit less. And we figure that out during the session as well. And figure out how to navigate the space as well. So I like to say that you can take a passive or an active approach. Initially, I say people should take a passive approach where all they're doing is sitting with attentive mindfulness and they're following how the experience unfolds in themselves without trying to get in the way or engage with it too much to begin with. I like to say that you're getting to know Salvia initially, and Salvia is also getting to know you. So you're both kind of just gathering information on each other. Salvia is seeing, how is this person put together? How do they hold their energies? Where is their tightness in their body? What do they believe about themselves? What do they believe about their situation in the world? And then over time, one kind of begins to know, okay, this is going to be my personal route working with this medicine. This is when I find, some people find they go to Salvia when they're feeling physically under the weather. Other people find that they do it when they are feeling anxiety. Other people are using it as a meditative aid. So it's just, finding your own way of working with it. So,
well, it's interesting to me that, when we start talking about what the future might look like, whether or not there'll be a Salvia land, or whether or not, when we start looking at addiction treatment centers, we've got certainly a plethora of centers that are really welcoming people back 5, 6, 7, 8 times because of their use of opioids, and these people are still not totally well integrated, or still not totally aware somatically or psychologically as to how to go ahead and deal with this. But what you're talking about is a plant that, when people smoke it in the right way and use it in the right way, potentially could help them to solve a lot of the issues that they've got. And that's something that's very hopeful. Yeah.
It is. And people are having these experiences not just from the physiological standpoint where they don't have the withdrawals anymore, but I think it was Peter Levine who mentioned that one of the major components with helping resolve trauma is for there to be an empathetic witnessing of what one has gone through. And this is what people feel so often with Salvia. I mentioned earlier that there can be this sense of other. And there's been a few instances, quite a lot of instances, where people smoke Salvia and they feel as if there is this being that is witnessing them from a place of empathy and understanding. And so they feel understood. There are some people who they smoke Salvia, and for the first time in their entire life, they feel as if something else understands the pain or the hurt that they're feeling.
Wow.
And so that brings, that's a sense of feeling as if you're not alone. There's part of the social isolation that comes with being addicted to substances, and how one can push people away out of one's life because you're so dependent on the substance. Okay, you go through these rehab centers, you get clean, you no longer have the withdrawals, but then you go back to your life and you still feel isolated and alone. And then what are you going to do? You're going to go back to the substances again, because that's better than feeling the pain of isolation or feeling the pain of not being understood.
Right. Not being seen, heard, recognized, and appreciated. Yeah.
Right. And with Salvia, people are having the experience where they're like, holy crap, I actually feel as if something else gets me. And so that is, when I say Salvia is being a practice, there's also this major relational component that comes with working with the plant over time. And as well, a big message that many people get from Salvia is that they don't need any substances, including Salvia. Salvia will be like, hey, you don't even need me for these things. If you just have presence, self-respect, engagement, curiosity, living with kindness, and just, dealing with life as it comes bit by bit, you're going to be all right. And you don't need anything else.
I love that. I love the sense of agency and the sense of efficacy, that individuals are the medicine that individuals are the answer, that they have those answers and they have that wisdom inside. And it sounds to me like, Salvia is certainly providing some of that wisdom and the opportunity to see ourselves as the wisdom keepers or the guides that really help us to get on the right path and do the right thing. So let me ask you, Christopher, it's been great having you here. I'm wondering, how do people find, and this is such a deep topic, we probably need to unpack a little bit more on another show. How do people get a hold of you, and how do they find out more about what you're up to and about Salvia?
Yeah, so my website is salviahealings.com, or you can email me at christopher@salviahealings.com. And I have some other podcasts and interviews there. I host Salvia integration sessions as well. And I'm in the process of setting up a somatic Salvia network, which is another direction where I'd like this to go, in really creating a community of people who are using Salvia for their own good and able to have group integration sessions and explore and talk about their experiences. Because, there are many people who, I host online integration circles, and they say, oh, thank God, finally I can talk to someone who understands my experience that I had. And so there's this communal aspect of communal sharing and bonding, which is also quite important when it comes to healing.
Yeah, we all want to be seen, heard, recognized, and appreciated for our story and for our experiences, no matter, how bizarre they might seem. It's like being able to remember your dreams and being able to share your dreams. I mean, dreams can be really kind of weird, people chasing you, people, you're being able to fly. I have a reoccurring dream of being able to fly. I mean, it's great, but, I don't necessarily share that with people, but I find out that, it really is about the ability to go ahead and rise above your circumstances and to be able to, like, bring it up to another level. And wouldn't we all like that? That's great. Yeah. It's good stuff. So I just want to say thank you again for being a part of the Mindfulness Experience podcast. And I'm looking forward to us talking a lot more during our peer group, and we'll talk soon.
Yeah, we will. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to the Mindfulness Experience podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe and leave us a review. We have other exciting guests coming up in the next few weeks, so stay tuned. For more mindfulness tips and tricks, visit our website at workmindfulness.com. Thanks again for being a part of the Mindfulness Experience. This is Keith Fivesen.